The moment his eyes met mine across the dining table, something shifted in the room. No one else seemed to notice it, but I did. The wine glass paused midair. The chatter around us faded like a television on mute. And for just a second, I felt like the only person in the world who knew the truth. The man sitting at the head of that impossibly elegant table, dressed in a custom suit, surrounded by silver, crystal, and pedigree, was the same man I'd handed my last $20 to. Outside. Barely an hour ago. I thought he was homeless. I thought I was being kind. And yet there he was, hosting the dinner party I had been dreading all week, watching me with the same unreadable expression he'd worn when I gave him that cash. He didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He just raised his glass in the smallest, slowest toast I'd ever seen. It was like a quiet signal, and it hit me harder than any insult I'd ever been given. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't just dinner. It was something else, and I had walked in completely unprepared. I was already late. By the time I reached the long stone driveway, my blouse was sticking to my back, my flats were worn from walking, and my heart was pounding for all the wrong reasons. I stood outside the gates of a mansion I had only seen once, on the internet. The kind of place that has its own zip code, hedges trimmed by professionals, and staff who never break eye contact. I didn't belong there and I felt it in my bones. But I had been invited. Invited, ordered, summoned. It's hard to say. The card didn't come with much explanation. Just a white envelope, no return address, and a line of embossed gold lettering that read, "Dinner. 7 p.m. Sharp. Attendance expected." It was from Ethan's father. I'd been married to Ethan for 8 months, and not once had I been allowed near his family estate. I'd seen pictures, family portraits in oil paint, articles in business journals, but the man himself? Never. Charles Whitmore was a myth. He lived in headlines, controlled boardrooms, and made decisions that moved markets. And yet he hadn't even shown up for our wedding. Then out of nowhere, a dinner invite. Just a place, a time, and the understanding that missing it wasn't an option. Ethan wouldn't talk about it. All week he was on edge, ironing shirts that were already pressed, rehearsing answers to questions no one had asked, critiquing my posture, my dress, my tone of voice. I thought we were going to dinner. Ethan acted like we were walking into a trial. That morning, everything went wrong. My car wouldn't start. The rideshare app froze, and by the time I found someone willing to drop me off nearby, I was 2 miles out, stranded on the edge of old money suburbia with zero cell signal, and exactly $20 in my purse, cash I was saving for my ride back. And that's when I saw him, sitting just outside the gate, near the brick column, where the estate's wrought iron fence curled like black vines around the perimeter. He wasn't panhandling. He wasn't even asking for anything. He sat there calmly, his hands folded over a worn canvas bag. A man in his 60s, maybe older. His shoes were scuffed. His shirt was frayed at the collar. His face was sun-weathered, but his eyes were steady, like he saw everything without needing to speak. He didn't look at me as I approached. Didn't lift his hand or offer a pitiful smile. He just sat there silent. I kept walking. 10 steps past him I stopped. Something in me just turned around. I pulled the $20 from my purse, walked back and placed it in his hand. "I hope this helps," I said quietly. He looked up at me, not grateful, not surprised. Just steady. His voice was soft when he spoke. "You'll need this more than I do." I gave a nervous laugh, shrugged it off and walked toward the gate. I should have listened. Once I passed the threshold, it felt like I was stepping onto another planet. The driveway curved for what felt like half a mile. Trees arched over it like a cathedral. I could hear fountains in the distance, but I couldn't see where the sound came from. The main house looked like something out of a movie. Columns, balconies, white brick that practically glowed in the sunlight. Inside, the walls were draped in portraits, the kind where no one ever smiles. The air was cold and still, like a museum after hours. The butler didn't greet me. He just nodded, took my jacket, and gestured to the formal dining room. That's when I saw him again. The man from the gate. Only this time, he wasn't wearing a threadbare shirt or dusty shoes. He was in a midnight blue suit, seated at the head of a crystal-studded table, with 4 servers standing around him like bodyguards. He held a wine glass in his left hand and stared straight at me. Charles Whitmore. I froze in place. I remember thinking I had to be wrong, that this had to be a coincidence. But I wasn't. It was him. The man I had mistaken for a beggar, the one I'd given my last dollar to, was the patriarch of one of the most powerful families on the East Coast, and the host of tonight's dinner. He didn't say a word, didn't acknowledge our earlier encounter. He just raised his glass a half-inch off the table in my direction, and let the silence stretch long enough for my skin to prickle. The room was full, Ethan, his cousins, his uncle from Rhode Island, a few corporate faces I recognized from business magazines. But at that moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own breath. I had walked into something I didn't understand, and the man I had just tried to help was about to change everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my choices, and the family I had married into. If this is your first time coming across one of our stories, welcome. Please hit the like button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And don't scroll away, because what happened next, no one saw coming. The room was bigger than I imagined. Not just in size but in presence. There was a kind of weight to it, the kind that makes your chest tighten before anyone even speaks. Crown molding stretched across the ceiling like lace carved into marble. A chandelier floated above the table, each crystal strand glittering like ice in a snowstorm. The table itself, long, polished, almost intimidating in its perfection, was already full of people, all of them dressed in quiet luxury. Not flashy, just unmistakably expensive. They noticed me the moment I stepped in. A woman near the end of the table, probably Ethan's cousin, leaned slightly to whisper into the ear of a man next to her. Another shifted in his chair, barely concealing a glance in my direction. They didn't smile. They didn't welcome me. They studied me, like I had walked into the wrong room wearing the wrong story. And at the head of the table, seated like a man watching his own chessboard, was him. Same face, same eyes. But everything else had changed. No more canvas bag, no frayed shirt, no dust on his shoes. His suit was tailored, deep navy with subtle pinstripes. He wore a watch that could probably pay off my student loans. One hand cradled a wine glass. The other rested on the arm of his chair with such calm control it made everyone else appear fidgety. He didn't blink when he saw me. He didn't react. Just held my gaze with that same expressionless look he gave me outside the gate. A look that said, "I saw who you were before you walked through that door." Ethan stood quickly when he noticed me. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing more eyes. His jaw was tight, his smile forced. He walked toward me, murmured something about traffic and how he'd been worried, but his words were rushed. He looked like someone who had already been caught lying, scrambling to contain the damage. When we took our seats, I felt it immediately, the gap. Not just between me and the rest of the table, but between me and Ethan. He sat beside me, but he wasn't beside me. His hand brushed mine once under the table, but it felt performative, not protective. He didn't look me in the eye. His focus kept drifting back to the head of the table, to his father, Charles. That name hadn't been said aloud yet, but I heard it anyway. In the way the others looked at him. In the sharp edge of every Mr. Whitmore. In the way no one spoke unless he was finished speaking first. And then came the whispers. They were quiet, but in a room that cold and formal, even a breath could carry. "Is that her?" The teacher thought they weren't speaking. "He's testing her. You know he always tests the women." Ethan must be panicking. I wasn't supposed to hear them, but I did. I sat still, spine straight, eyes forward, pretending I belonged. But inside my stomach was tightening into knots so small I could barely breathe. I kept waiting for Ethan to say something, to speak up, to introduce me, to fill the silence. But he didn't. He cleared his throat once, reached for his water, said something to the waiter about sparkling instead of still. And all the while, his father sat in silence, swirling the wine in his glass like a man counting time in circles. Then, without turning his head, Charles finally spoke. "How was the walk?" The entire table fell silent. I felt the blood rush to my ears. My fork froze an inch above my plate. The question was quiet, casual, but it was aimed directly at me. Before I could answer, Ethan stammered something. "She had car trouble," he said quickly, almost defensively. She couldn't get a ride." Charles turned his eyes to him, one brow slightly raised. That's all it took to make Ethan stop talking. And then Charles looked at me again. You made it though, he said. Not a question. A statement. Meant to corner me without lifting a finger. I nodded. My throat was dry. Yes, sir. He tilted his head almost imperceptibly. That's a rare thing these days. People showing up when it's hard to. I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet. Dinner continued. Courses came and went with quiet efficiency. Lobster bisque, truffle something I couldn't pronounce. I pushed food around my plate while trying not to betray the storm happening inside my head. Every fork scrape felt like a shout. Every napkin fold felt like a judgment. Ethan kept glancing at his father, watching him more than watching me. And I started to realize something. He was scared. Not uncomfortable. Not annoyed. Scared. I'd never seen him like that before. His leg bounced under the table. He laughed too loudly at a dry joke from across the room. When Charles raised his glass, Ethan copied the motion half a beat too late, like a student copying his teacher, or a son trying to pass a test he'd already failed. When dessert arrived, some kind of custard set in crystal, I leaned toward Ethan and whispered, "Why didn't you tell me he was going to be here?" He didn't answer. He just shifted in his chair, eyes still fixed on the man at the head of the table. And then I heard it again. This time from the woman seated beside Ethan's uncle. "He's been doing this since college," she murmured. "Shows up like that when you least expect it. See what people do when they think no one's watching. He's done it before." The man beside her whispered. "Oh yes. One time he posed as a janitor at one of the firms. Sat outside for 2 days. You either ignore him, or you pass the test." I blinked, the realization sinking in like cold water down my spine. It wasn't random. Charles Whitmore hadn't just happened to be sitting outside the gate. He had been waiting, watching, measuring. My kindness hadn't gone unnoticed. It had been part of the table. Another dish he'd served with the rest of the evening. And I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to be honored or humiliated. He looked at me again then. Just a brief glance. And in that second, something passed between us. Not a threat. Not a challenge. Something quieter. More calculated. As if to say, now I know who you are. Let's see who he is. And I knew in that moment, this dinner wasn't about welcoming me into the family. It was about unmasking someone. And I was no longer sure who the target really was. Because if Charles Whitmore was willing to dress like a stranger and wait outside his own home for hours, what else was he willing to do? And what, exactly, had Ethan done to make him this suspicious? Whatever peace I had clung to at the start of the evening was gone. I was now part of something bigger than dinner, and the man I had once believed to be silent and distant was neither. He saw everything. And he had just begun. I should have known the food was just a distraction. No one here had come to eat. As the plates were cleared, the real course was served, conversation, laced with knives so fine you didn't feel the cuts until you bled. It began with a toast from the woman across the table. Her voice was honeyed, her eyes sharp. "To new beginnings," she said, lifting her glass. "And to the strength it takes to date." Outside one circle, someone chuckled. Another murmured, "How brave." I smiled politely, pretending I didn't understand. But I did. I understood every word, even the ones they didn't say out loud. Ethan didn't look at me. His hands stayed neatly folded on his lap, his mouth tight, like a man trying not to breathe too loudly. The man beside Charles leaned in. "So Lauren," he said, "what do you do again? Ethan mentioned you work with children." "I'm a teacher," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Oh, how sweet." A woman to my left cooed. "That must be so rewarding. Especially with your background," another added. "You must relate to them so well." I froze. "Background?" Then she smiled. "Ethan told us your mother's a nurse?" I nodded. "And your father?" she asked sweetly. There it was. "Passed away," I replied, eyes on my water glass. "Ah," she sighed. "Such a shame. Still, your mother must be proud. A schoolteacher. That's lovely." The table quieted just long enough for the insult to land. I glanced at Ethan. He was looking down at his plate. He didn't say a word. Didn't shift. Didn't flinch. Didn't defend me. I wanted to speak. To push back. But every instinct screamed at me to stay still, to survive the room, to wait for dessert and plan my escape. Charles said nothing, but his gaze was still on me, watchful, unreadable. That's when the unraveling began. It started small. A cousin across the table joked about Ethan's old Range Rover. Something about it being Daddy's last gift before the cutoff. Cutoff? I asked without thinking. Oh, honey. The woman beside me smiled, a little too wide. Ethan didn't tell you? He said. His dad stepped back from the family. I replied slowly. That he was private. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. Private? Charles. That man built his life in the spotlight. No, sweetie. He didn't step back. He stepped away from Ethan. After the Miami thing, another piped up. Oh, don't bring that up, someone warned, waving their fork. What happened in Miami? I asked. The table went still. Ethan's jaw clenched. His hand gripped his napkin tightly. Charles remained motionless, sipping his wine as if the conversation didn't concern him at all. One man, maybe an uncle, shrugged. It's not our place. Another added. He told us it was a misunderstanding. Something about stolen investments, but you know how these things get messy. Ethan said it was a bank error. I said, more to myself than to them. This time even Charles's glass paused midair. The cousin across the table looked directly at me. Did he also tell you your rent was paid from one of Charles's frozen accounts? What? She blinked, clearly enjoying the confusion on my face. You didn't know? He begged Charles for help last year. Said you were living somewhere dangerous. That you deserved better. I stared at Ethan. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. I asked him, I whispered. I asked him straight up if you helped. He swore we were doing it on our own. Charles finally spoke. I didn't help. His voice was smooth, quiet. But I allowed it. That sentence hit harder than anything else in the room. Not just because of what it implied, but because it confirmed the one thing I had always feared. That I had been watched, measured, judged. Long before this night, I suddenly felt very small, like a player in a game I hadn't agreed to join. I looked back at Ethan. Why didn't you tell me? He didn't answer. His silence was no longer protective. It was damning. The dessert came, light, elegant, too perfect to be real. But I couldn't taste anything. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. That's when Charles stood. No one else moved. He placed his napkin beside his plate, calm and deliberate. Then he looked at me. Lauren, he said evenly. Would you walk with me? He didn't ask. He summoned. I hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. Every part of me knew this wasn't small talk. This wasn't polite chit-chat between courses. This was the moment the veil would lift. The moment truth stopped whispering and started screaming. I stood slowly. Ethan reached for my hand. I didn't take it. I followed Charles out of the dining room. And the silence that followed us wasn't silence at all. It was every lie Ethan had told, echoing behind me like footsteps I'd never noticed before. The hallway to Charles's library felt longer than it should have been, carpeted in silence, thick with anticipation. Every step I took was heavy, like my shoes knew the weight of what was coming before I did. He opened the door without looking at me. Didn't gesture, didn't smile. Just walked in and expected I'd follow. I did. The room smelled like old paper, dark wood, and something faintly smoky, maybe cedar, maybe something older. Books lined the shelves from floor to ceiling, each one looking like it had been chosen carefully and placed deliberately. The fireplace was lit, but barely. Just enough flame to remind you of warmth without actually giving much of it. Charles walked to a side table, poured himself a drink, then poured one for me. Whiskey. No ice. He handed it to me without a word, then sat in a leather chair by the fire. I stood, unsure if I was supposed to sit or stay upright like a student called to the principal's office. Finally he spoke. That man at the gate. That was me. I already knew. But hearing him say it, the clarity, the power of it, hit me all over again. I wanted to see something, he continued. I needed to know who you were without anyone telling me first. No dress, no makeup, no polite smiles across a dinner table. Just instinct. Reaction. I stared at him, heart pounding. He didn't blink. I wasn't testing you for Ethan. I was testing you for myself. My throat closed. Shame rose fast, hot and unbearable. I shook my head. I didn't know who you were. I thought you were hungry. I gave you what I had. You gave more than that, he said, watching me. You gave dignity, even when you had none to spare. That undid me. I sank into the chair across from him, tears pushing at the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I've never been in a room like that, I whispered. I've never felt so small. And Ethan, he just sat there. Let them talk to me like that. Charles leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. You expected him to stand up for you. Yes, I said. I thought love meant protection. At the very least, partnership. His eyes didn't soften, but something in his jaw relaxed. I was disowned once too, he said suddenly. By my father. I looked at him surprised. I made choices he didn't approve of. Started from nothing. Slept in my car. Built an empire brick by brick while they laughed at me from their country clubs. A beat passed. When I made my first million, I sent him a photo of the check. What did he do? I asked. Charles smiled bitterly. He cashed it. We sat in silence for a moment. The crackle of the fire the only sound. Then his expression changed. It grew sharper. More deliberate. You need to know something, he said, reaching to a drawer beside him. He pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the table between us. I liked you at that gate. I respected you. That kind of honesty can't be faked. I stared at the folder. But Ethan, he tapped the cover once. There are things about my son you don't know. Things you deserve to. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for it. Charles didn't stop me, but he didn't encourage me either. Before you married my son, he said slowly, you should have seen this. I looked at him. His face was carved in stone. What is it? I asked. He didn't answer. Just stood. And walked out of the room, leaving me alone, with the file. The folder felt heavier than it looked, like it carried a truth so dense. It was straining the paper. My palms were slick, my heart beat loud in my ears. I opened it. Slowly. At first, it looked like paperwork, financial documents, printouts, numbers. Nothing that screamed betrayal, until I really saw them. Ethan's name was all over them. Maxed out credit cards with limits I couldn't even dream of. Secret bank accounts opened just months before our wedding. Large wire transfers. One of them, $10,000, sent to a woman's name I didn't recognize. I blinked, heart-catching. Scanned again. The name was repeated. Over and over. Charlotte Elkins. Then came the next layer. A scanned prenuptial agreement, but not the one I signed. This one had different terms. Terms that benefited him. And when I flipped through the final pages, I saw a digital signature. Mine. But it wasn't mine. I stared at it, nausea rising. He'd forged it. Forged a legal document before marrying me. I clutched the folder tighter, as if holding it harder would keep my world from cracking apart. But it was already in pieces. The next page had emails. Messages between Ethan and a man named Richard Hargrove, Charles's attorney. The subject line on one email read, urgent. Timing for inheritance release after marriage. I felt the room tilt. The truth snapped into place. Ethan didn't marry me for love. He married me for leverage. He knew his father wouldn't release a cent unless he cleaned up his image, married someone respectable, and I, naive and trusting, had been perfect for the part. I flipped to the last page. It was a printed screenshot. A message thread. Between Ethan and Charlotte. The date was 2 weeks ago. She was pregnant, she wrote. Doctor says it's a boy. Should we tell her yet? Ethan replied, not yet. Timing's bad. I'll handle it after this weekend. The page slipped from my hand. Handle it. Handle me. I sat there, breathless. Betrayed didn't even begin to describe it. I wasn't a wife, I was a pawn. A strategy. A neatly wrapped solution to get back into his father's favor. And yet, the final gut punch hadn't landed. Not until I noticed the sticky note clipped to the last page, in Charles's handwriting. She's invited tomorrow. You deserve to see the whole stage, Charlotte. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just some buried secret. This was an encore. A second act. A carefully orchestrated performance set to unravel in front of everyone. And I was supposed to sit there. Smile. Pretend. But something in me snapped. A quiet snap. Not rage. Not desperation. Something colder. Clearer. I wasn't going to cry in that chair. I wasn't going to crawl out of that estate like a discarded prop. They wanted a show? They were going to get one. Every betrayal leaves behind a blueprint. And mine was beginning to trace itself perfectly. I need you to breathe. I wasn't ready for that twist either. If your heart just dropped, tap the like button. It tells me I'm not the only one who felt it. And don't keep this story to yourself. Share it with someone who loves real-life drama as much as you do, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. My thoughts were sharp now. No longer swirling. I was crushed, yes. Played, definitely. But buried? No. I had been buried before. And I knew exactly how to rise. I didn't sleep. Not really. I just lay there in the dark, listening to the silence of the estate, trying to figure out which version of my life had ever been real. By morning, my mind was a map of cracks, every memory with Ethan now smeared with suspicion. I waited until after breakfast, waited until the air was thick with quiet tension, the kind that makes even silverware sound like thunder. Then I asked Ethan to talk. Alone. We stood in the west garden, surrounded by trimmed hedges and blooming roses. Ironic, really, everything so perfectly manicured, while the truth rotted underneath. I looked him in the eye and asked the only question that mattered. Why did you marry me, Ethan? His face twitched, but he tried to laugh it off. Where's this coming from? I held up the folder. From your father's library. From your own signatures. Your lies. He snatched it from me like a child caught stealing candy. This is insane. My dad's been trying to ruin my life for years. You think you're the first person he's tried to poison against me. I didn't flinch. He didn't forge my signature. He scoffed. God, Lauren. I told you not to talk to him alone. You think he's helping you? He's manipulating you. That man would rather see me dead than successful. And the emails to your lawyer? The inheritance plan? Charlotte's baby. His face paled, but just for a second. That's not how it looks. Charlotte, it was before us. She's just making noise to get attention now that she knows I'm married. She said the baby is yours. He shrugged. Even if it is, it doesn't mean I don't love you. I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprised me. It was raw and hollow. Love? You forged my name. You married me for money. You planned to handle me after the weekend. He blinked. You went through my private messages? There it was. The shift. The deflection. The gaslight. You broke into my world and now you're blaming me for not being perfect, he snapped. You know what? This is exactly why I didn't tell you. You overthink everything. You never trust me. He reached for my hand, softening his voice. Let's just get through this weekend, okay? We'll talk more when we're home. My dad's trying to break us. Don't let him. I pulled away. You already did, and I walked back inside. But the storm didn't wait. It arrived wrapped in silken heels. Charlotte. She showed up at brunch, uninvited, in a lavender dress that clung to her belly like a badge of war. Her hand rested protectively over it, her smile weaponized. Ethan froze mid-sentence. The table went silent. And then came Charles. Calm, deliberate. Good of you to join us, Charlotte, he said. There's a seat right here, next to your child's father. Ethan's jaw clenched. What the hell is this? Charles didn't blink. A moment of clarity. Long overdue. Then he looked directly at me. Lauren deserves honesty. Something this family hasn't seen in years. Ethan stood up, fists clenched. You don't get to decide that. Oh, Charles asked. You mean like you decided which wife to choose and which child to hide? The table gasped. I didn't hide anything. Ethan shouted. You're the one who left me out to dry. You took everything from me and then punished me for trying to fix it. I sat there silent, watching the man I thought I knew crumble into someone I couldn't recognize. Charlotte sipped her orange juice like it was theater. I married Lauren because I needed to, Ethan continued, breath ragged. But I stayed because I wanted to. That should count for something. My voice was quiet but clear. It doesn't. He turned to me, wounded, angry. You really think I'm the villain here? After everything I've done for you, you didn't do it for me, I said. You did it for the money. For your ego. For control. His mother cried softly into her napkin. One of his cousins excused herself from the table. The damage was total. And in that stillness Charles stood. You can leave, Ethan. What? You're no longer welcome under this roof. Ethan's lips parted, but no sound came. This estate, this legacy, it's for people with integrity. You may be my son, but you've made your choice. And that was it. Ethan looked at me one last time, as if expecting me to follow, as if I still might choose him. But I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't blink. He turned and left. Charlotte didn't go after him. She stayed for dessert. That night, I sat on the balcony, the stars soft and indifferent above me. Charles came out with 2 glasses of wine, and handed me one. I'd like you to stay through the weekend, he said. Just you. I nodded. And for the first time in days I felt still. Not healed. Not whole. But still. And that was a start. The air at Whitmore Estate felt different the next morning. It wasn't lighter. Not yet, but it had shifted. Like the walls were exhaling, no longer forced to hold their breath around secrets. Charles invited me to the library again. Same deep mahogany shelves. Same sunlight slicing across the desk, but this time he didn't test me. He handed me a folder. Another one. This, he said, is the new will. Just signed it this morning. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. The pages were dense, filled with legal language I barely understood. But one sentence stood out, printed in bold. Ethan Whitmore is hereby removed as beneficiary, effective immediately. I read it again. Then again. There's a trust, Charles continued, for my future grandchildren. If and when they exist, you'll be the trustee. I looked up at him stunned. Me. You've proven yourself, he said. When I was young, my father disowned me because I chose integrity over obedience. You chose the right thing, even when it cost you everything. I didn't know what to say. For so long, I had been performing, playing the perfect wife, trying to make sense of the lies, carrying the weight of shame that wasn't even mine to begin with. Now someone finally saw me. Not as a pawn. Not as Ethan's wife. But as me. Charles sat down across from me. I run a nonprofit, education for underprivileged youth. I want you on the board. I laughed softly, out of disbelief more than amusement. Me. Yes, he said again. You know what it's like to be overlooked. People like you bring compassion into rooms filled with arrogance. That moment didn't come with dramatic music or tears. It came with a silence so full, so pure, it nearly cracked me open. I nodded. And that was the beginning of the end. Not of my life. Of that version of it. I didn't confront Ethan again. There was nothing left to say. I told Charles the first wanted to leave quietly. No drama, no courtroom scene. He understood. His staff helped me pack my things. No press. No prying eyes. Just 3 suitcases and a woman done with being second-guessed. I left the wedding photos. The ring. Even the perfume Ethan once said he liked because now the scent made me nauseous. I booked a separate condo through one of Charles's contacts. Somewhere peaceful, small, safe. The next day I filed for an annulment. And then the calls started. At first, Ethan's number flashed across my screen constantly. Voicemails layered with fake warmth and thinly veiled panic. Lauren, baby, let's talk. Then came the guilt trips. Is this really how you want our story to end? After everything we've shared, then the threats. If you think you can just walk away and steal my father from me, you're wrong. I didn't respond. Not once. That silence? That was my revenge. No justifying why I refused to be the woman who stood beside a liar just to keep the peace. I changed my number. Blocked him everywhere. But I knew silence would echo louder than any scream. The media caught wind a week later. Heir disowned. Son snubbed by billionaire father. Mystery woman named trustee. Ethan spiraled in public. Interviews, tantrums, the works. Every time he opened his mouth, he buried himself deeper. Meanwhile, I started attending nonprofit meetings. Small, intentional gatherings. Schools, libraries, community centers. I spoke with teenage girls about financial literacy. About dignity. About walking away from anything that doesn't feel like love. And I did it all quietly. Because revenge doesn't always come wrapped in fire and fury. Sometimes it looks like peace. Sometimes it sounds like a door closing softly behind you. And sometimes, it's never saying another word to the one who thought you couldn't live without them. 6 months later, the night was a velvet hush, broken only by the clinking of crystal and the quiet hum of anticipation. I stood backstage, hands clasped, heartbeat steady. Not nervous, just aware. Aware of how far I'd come. The gala was for the Whitmore Education Foundation, held at the Grand Regent Ballroom, under a chandelier the size of my old apartment. Cameras flashed. Champagne flowed. But none of it fazed me. I wasn't here as someone's wife anymore. I was here as someone's partner. In legacy. In purpose. Charles walked up to the podium first. His voice carried with quiet strength as he introduced me, not as an assistant or a guest, but as the foundation's co-chair. My partner in legacy, he said. And when I stepped forward, the applause didn't sound like validation. It sounded like arrival. I spoke about second chances, about invisible battles, about the strength of being underestimated. And when I looked around the room, filled with donors and dignitaries, I didn't shrink. I didn't bend. I stood tall, not because I needed to prove something, but because I no longer needed to prove anything. Later that night, Charles pulled me aside. Charlotte had the baby, he said quietly. I blinked. And Ethan? Not involved. His choice. I nodded. No comment. No satisfaction. Just peace. Time doesn't always heal, but it reveals. And in those 6 months, it revealed the kind of man Ethan truly was. And the kind of woman I refused to be reduced to. I never saw Ethan again. Didn't need to. But I did see Charlotte once, at the hospital briefly. She looked exhausted. Alone. We didn't exchange words. Just a glance. And maybe a sliver of understanding. Then came the moment I didn't expect to matter so much. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was walking through a part of town I hadn't seen since I'd left my old life behind. Just needed air. Clarity. Solitude. And as I passed by the same iron gates I had once rushed through, late, breathless, full of hope, I paused. Same estate. Same towering gate. And then I saw her. A woman, maybe in her 60s, thin coat, brittle fingers gripping a small plastic bag of sandwiches. She looked up at me with tired eyes and offered one gently, mistaking me for someone in need. I smiled. And without taking the sandwich, I took her hand, pressed a bill into it and whispered, "Kindness always circles back." She stared at me in confusion, then gratitude, then awe. And in that one moment it all circled back. This was the same gate where I'd handed over my last cash to a beggar who wasn't really a beggar. The same spot where my journey, my unraveling and becoming had begun. Full circle. I turned and walked away, no need to look back. And in my mind, I spoke one last truth to the girl I used to be. I thought I was walking into judgment, but I walked into a test. And while Ethan failed it, I passed. Because this wasn't a story about gold digging or wealth or betrayal. It was a story about choice. About staying kind even when you've been bruised. About walking away without fanfare. And winning anyway. I didn't scream. I didn't shatter his life publicly. I simply lived a better one. And that was how I took back my power without raising my voice. And that was how I took back my power without raising my voice. If this ending gave you chills or left you speechless, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because my next story might just be even wilder. And please drop a comment below. I read every single one.